Once again, taking a live look here as Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin will face Congress publicly for the first time in a matter of moments to explain his failure to quickly notify the president and other senior leaders about his hospitalization last month for complications from prostate cancer surgery. He's expected to hear some sharp questions and criticism from members of the House Armed Services Committee for keeping his hospital stay secret for days, including from President Biden. Now, a number of Republicans have blasted him for the lack of transparency and used the incident to slam the Biden administration for not keeping Congress informed. Ahead of all of this, I do want to bring in an expert to discuss this further and what we can expect to happen during the hearing. Robert Sanders is a distinguished lecturer of national security at the University of New Haven, and among his many roles, Sanders served as a staff attorney and legislative director working with the U.S. House and Senate. Thank you so much for taking the time to be here with us today.
I'm glad to be with you, Josh.
All right, so first off, I want to go back to basics here. Can you explain to me the, basics of this hearing? What do we expect to happen and how did we get to this point?
Well, so the hearing itself is entitled A Review of Defense Secretary Austin's Unannounced Absence. The secretary was diagnosed with cancer. As a result of that diagnosis, he had to have prostate surgery. When he went into the hospital for the surgery, there's a process, a procedure called a transfer of authority, or TOA, where he transfers his ability to do his job to his deputy. Why is that important? Because the Secretary of Defense, along with the president, are the people who direct the actions of U.S. military. When our military forces go in to any type of strike or combat operation, the directions don't come from the Joint Chiefs of Staff. They don't come from the secretaries of the Army, the Navy, the Air Force. They come from the president via the Secretary of Defense. When the Secretary of Defense is out of pocket, the Deputy Secretary of Defense becomes that person through a transfer of authority. So that's why this is important. Because our military operations can't happen without that chain. It's actually called the command authority chain of the Department of Defense.
We, of course, have the wars that are ongoing in Israel with Hamas, and then you have Ukraine with Russia. Does that essentially make Austin's job even more important than it may have been before that?
It was always important. It'd always be important. His job emanated from the end of World War II. So at the end of World War II, the National Security Act of 1947 set up his office, set up the new offices that we now have for the secretaries of the services, set up the National Security Council, the CIA, and among other things. So all of those things emanate after our movement from what we had was a Secretary of War during the time preceding World War II, from the beginning of the nation, to move to a Secretary of Defense. And that's not just words, it's also posture about where we are as a nation and what we're trying to do after World War II and the carnage that it brought.
What sort of questions do we expect to hear today? We know that Republicans have said that Austin needed to alert President Biden and others about the situation, and Republicans wanted to know as well. So what sort of questions do we expect are going to be asked?
Well, I'm hopeful that the questions are going to be respectful questions and be consistent with following the HIPAA Privacy Act that Secretary Austin law that he was allowed to live under, just like every other American citizen, which means you don't give away your medical information unless it's voluntarily. Now, obviously, he's in a slightly different position as the Secretary of Defense, but this is a public hearing. They could have done this in private. The public side of this is somewhat disturbing to me, particularly if, as some of the news reports indicate, there's going to be a grilling. Now, the grilling on the failure to notify, completely proper in the oversight part. But if it starts to slip into parts of his medical care, procedures, etc., that's unacceptable, and that's outside the area of oversight and over the line. And I'm concerned about that because of things like in September when Marjorie Taylor Greene tried to reduce his salary to $1 because she was dissatisfied, along with Representative Corey from Florida. I'm concerned about that because of the recent reporting of the slide in racially charged rhetoric coming out of the House in particular. Some of it was directed at Secretary Mayorkas. I'm concerned about that because of the fact that although Secretary Mayorkas was impeached this past week, back in September, and something was introduced to impeach Secretary Austin. So I'm concerned about those things today. Proper oversight, yes, that is a duty of the House of Representatives Defense Committee. But proper oversight doesn't include HIPAA violations or attempts to violate HIPAA.
This is probably a hard question to answer, but is there any sort of leniency considering we're talking about cancer?
You know, the big C in American culture is the scariest diagnosis that any American have. And Secretary Austin said himself that he made a mistake in not telling everyone when this happened because it was a gut punch and it literally knocked him back. And as a result of that, he tried to keep it private because the pain of being diagnosed with cancer was something that he wanted to hold as privately as possible. Now, once he went in the hospital, it was now upon his aides to take certain actions. But it's unclear what required actions they had. So just this week, on the 26th, an unclassified summary of the 30-day review that his chief of staff ordered was issued. And it said that the procedures were unclear about what the staff could tell and who they could tell because of HIPAA, and that there weren't any real procedures other than the internal operation of the transfers of authority for them to do. Now, they should have informed the Gang of Eight, which are the legislators who are responsible for the intelligence committees, the leadership of the House and Senate, and the leadership of the defense committees in both the House and the Senate. That's probably going to be changed and actually put into some type of procedural act for internal operation with the Pentagon for transfer of authority.
What sort of, I guess, disciplinary action could be taken? Do we know?
Well, the actual summary that came out of 26 said they're unable to determine exactly who, if anyone, was in error and not making a mistake. And Secretary Austin has said it was his responsibility to make sure that these things happen, and he didn't do that, which is an honest representation of what went down. He should have directed his staff to notify people. He was under that gut punch, as he described it himself, and in pain and in the hospital under sedation. So there's a lot of things that went down, but there isn't really one belly button, so to speak, that you can point to and say, this is the exact point where the error happened, and this is the person who did it.
My last question, a lot of things these days, no surprise, are kind of split down party lines. Is this another situation like that?
Clearly. Clearly. I mean, you go all the way back to September and the $1 bill by Marjorie Taylor Greene, the amendment to change his salary to $1. She said she didn't even deserve the $1. You go back to the floating of impeachment inquiry. All of those things were partisan politics. This is partisan politics. Yes, there's a notification that should have happened. It didn't happen. But this public hearing to work into the details of that, not necessary. A hearing, yes, not necessarily public.
All right. Robert Sanders, thank you so much for taking the time to be here. We appreciate your time.
You're welcome. Take care.